Well, hey everyone, happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. And as a special treat today, John and I are actually doing a live recording of Marketing Over Coffee. So let's get all set up for that. So, John, it's Marketing Over Coffee. I'm turning it over to you.
You're just throwing it my way. Okay, yeah, we can jump right into what we've got going on. There's a bunch of stuff happening. Christopher is on the road. He has been doing his road tour. And actually, we were talking with you a couple weeks ago, and as part of my co-working arrangement, I actually ended up getting bounced. It's a long, complicated story that nobody wants to hear, but basically we were cut short. And so I was like, oh, we've got to get you back. We want to talk some more because we had a bunch of other stuff on the list too. And so leading off, what I wanted to kick into is project management, because this is something that you have a ton of experience from, both on just normal corporate projects and then also software development lifecycle. And I've done a bunch of stuff in the same arenas. So we have a whole list of gripes and complaints, but we figure we could start with some best practices and where things are going. But yeah, to lead off with, I guess, it's just let me lay down a little bit more foundation too, though, as we go. Over in Analytics for Marketers, if you're not familiar with that, we're talking about every week. That's where we have discussions and we kind of get the initial research for this kind of stuff. We talked about project management. And so the list that came out of there was, here's the whole rundown. We've got Asana, Jira, Monday, Trello, MS Project, Rike, Basecamp, Airtable, Excel. So that's beyond my, like, Rike I've never used. Do you even know what that one is? No. Okay. So, but Asana has been kind of king of the hill over the past couple of years for everything that I've seen, as far as just a lot of people using it at easy access. But yeah, where do you want to start on that list, I guess? So if we're going to start taking pot shots at tools and process, where do you want to go?
Well, I was trained more formally on Microsoft Project, which I still have a soft spot for. It's very, there's a lot of good about Microsoft Project. But unless you're in Microsoft Shop, you tend to not have access to Microsoft Project as a standalone. So, you're not going to find a company who's a Google Shop that's also going to have Microsoft Project. I mean, that scenario does exist, but typically if you have the Microsoft Suite or you're in Microsoft 365 or something like that, then you use Microsoft Project. If you're using SharePoint, you likely have Microsoft Project, those kinds of things. But that's not exclusively true. So we also know a lot of companies that will use SharePoint and a Jira or a Basecamp or a Trello or all of the above. And I think that's really where I'd want to start. Is what I've seen in my experience is companies are using a bit of all of the above. And the goal of project management software is to do just that. It's to manage tasks, it's to manage resources. Sometimes it's to manage budget, but that gets a little tricky. That's something that you can do in a lot of these tools, but at the core, it's a task management tool, a project management tool. You can call it portfolios, you can do whatever. So where I see it sort of get overconflated is we're asking these tools to do many things, and we're not giving the tools the data that they need in order to do the things that we're asking them to do. So, for example, we want to know, is Chris over-resourced? Well, in order to know that, we have to get every little last piece of data into the tool in order to see that. But then we also have to make sure we're keeping it up to date. And so a lot of it comes down to process. So the tools are great. I would say, honestly, you can't go wrong with any tool. Where it goes wrong is the people in the process of someone actually managing it, keeping it up to date. That's why project managers exist. I love them. I was one. Your sole focus is keeping these tools up to date. And it is a thankless job, because as soon as you get the information in, it's changed. And so you're constantly chasing people. And a lot of these tools, depending on what you're doing, aren't set up for like agile development, for example. They're more waterfall. So like those are all the things that you have to like know and take in consideration. John, I could talk your ear off about project management tools all day long. So I just want to kind of like stop there. Hopefully I've given you enough of a foundation to jump off from.
Yeah, right. To jump in. Well, I think a very important point that people miss, because I hadn't even thought about this as we were doing the outline, is the difference between project management and task management. Really, a bunch of these tools are task managers. Like that's where it's just kind of like, here's all the things they need to do, but it's not project management. And it's funny, a lot of them are good at like, okay, here's the people that are on this one, so that's where it goes. But very few of them will go as far as budget, putting dollar figures on things to actually see. And that is part of project management. So yeah, most of these tools are really only task managers. And it's interesting too, talking about how it's all about data and integrations, right? Like there's a lot of tools on this list that are not coming from a project background, whether it's software or some other area, but it makes sense because it can grab data from those other systems or processes. If you've got Jira, you're unlocking your whole software development project, whole process, and being able to pull in your developer time and hours spent and features and support tickets, like all that kind of stuff, which makes a project management tool a lot more powerful. And you're basically skipping all these steps of having to integrate stuff and get things going. But I want to talk about project. I didn't want it to be a full-on complaint session about Microsoft Project, but I think a key point with that is that it was such a great tool during its heyday that it still survives. Like literally everyone wants it dead, but it maintains and it lives. Because you can buy a standalone version. But even yesterday, I went to the Microsoft site, and when you try to go to it at 404s, you can't even get to it. Like it's not accessible. But one of the key win with that I'd always seen was the fact that you can have your project and it handles dependencies so well. If one thing, somebody has to take a vacation X week, you update the project plan and it moves everything, everything that person has to be in on now gets pushed out a week because they're not around. And that's what you want with project management software, is for it to save you when you don't realize that, like, because of this weird random thing of these 5 people being on vacation, these 4 weeks, 2 months from now, that is going to put our, deadline in jeopardy, and we need to work around that. So yeah, I don't know. Again, we're talking as both project fans, but is there anything else that kind of comes to mind when you're talking about project and how it compares to the other tools in the stack that are?
With Microsoft Project, people saw it as inflexible, whereas I saw the tool as incredibly powerful. Yes, it was more suited for a waterfall process. We tried to make it work for a more iterative, like an agile software development process. At the time, at least, it really wasn't well suited to do that. It really was more suited for a waterfall process. But a lot of the pros, and I know that some of the tools like Asana and Jira and probably even Monday and Basecamp, and they probably all do these things. But again, it's, the data that goes in, like Microsoft Project. You could list all your resources, you could list their hourly rates, you could list their working hours or how many hours a day they were available, for example, and it would start to build out this resourcing plan. So, we would use it we had a lot of cross-functional teams, and so I would have my developers and my designers and my marketers and my salespeople and the research team and the epidemiologists. And I would have all of those resources in and all of that data in, because I was being asked questions like, how much is this? If we do this thing, how much does it cost? And I could have done that on a spreadsheet. I could have said, this is what they're telling me. But then I couldn't also build out that timeline with dependencies as easily. And so Microsoft Project, at least from my point of view, was really the gold standard of, this is the tool that does all the things you want it to do. And now you have, so we use Asana internally at Trust Insights, and we've started using it more like we would use a Microsoft Project, with resources and milestones and dependencies, and showing the team, like, this is what that looks like. Is it as powerful as Microsoft Project? In my opinion, again, one person's opinion, no. But I do think that if we start to use it consistently in the way that we're hoping to, then we can get there. I know Basecamp is a really powerful tool. Jira is a really powerful tool. I personally tend to think of Jira as more of like a support ticket tool, but I think that it really is, you can use it as a project management tool. It's interesting. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit about the SDLC, but in my mind, there's a difference between the project lifecycle and the software development lifecycle. And this was always a point of tension at my old company, because depending on who you talk to, the software development lifecycle was it. That was all you did, and that included the project lifecycle. But if you talk to anyone in the PMO, and I would love to get people's comments on this, see how other people are feeling. The software development lifecycle is part of the overall project lifecycle. It was just a segment of it, versus the software development lifecycle was the end all be all of everything. What's your experience with that, John?
Yeah, no, everything you've said is right on the mark, and we'll dive in a little bit more on software development lifecycle, because that has its own batch of stuff. But one thing I wanted to do is I'll just run down the tool list and throw some, my impressions on some of these out and see if you agree as far as how some of this stuff works. I have Asana and Monday are both kind of similar. They're leader of SaaS. Like, it's easy to get into. Everybody can do it. They kind of understand where it goes. Jira is just what you said, ticketing. There's a lot of the whole Atlassian infrastructure is there. So there's all kinds of other stuff to jump into it. Trello, I did want to mention, the key with Trello for me has always been cards. And that's more for an individual thing. If cards are part of your workflow, like I'll have, even for event management, cards are great, because you just want to be able to move a card along the board and see where things are at. And a lot of the other tools can't handle the cards as well. I know I'm not up to date on the state of cards for everybody, but I know Trello is very good at that end of things. And then Basecamp and a lot of marketing and content areas is just great, because you can throw in all the other assets in there. I know there's agencies that will have a Basecamp set up for every client, and then you can have your clients accessing their own content and proofing stuff, and you can have all the digital assets in there and people can get to them. So that makes it a unique solution over there. And then just Airtable and Excel. Yeah, if you're in a no budget situation, you can do these tools that are just beefed up spreadsheets, and that will work. It can get you there. I don't know. What do you think about that? Is there anything I missed on that line, or things you see differently for some of those tools?
No, I think that's a really good summary. And I want to go back to Basecamp, because Basecamp, similar to tools like Notion, which isn't surprisingly on this list, or basically they kind of become almost like an ecosystem. And I think that that's what a lot of these tools are trying to be, is sort of an ecosystem of, here's your repository of all of your assets and all of your background information. And so almost like that one-stop shop. And so I think that, if that's what you're trying to create, then there are definitely tools that do that well, Basecamp being one of them. There's a lot of chat functions included in those systems. So you don't have to have like an external Discord or a Slack or email. Everything can be contained within it. That's what SharePoint was meant to do as a complement to Microsoft Project. So you have your repository for all of your assets and everything, and then you have your project planning tool, whereas tools like Basecamp and Notion kind of encompass all of that. But you make certain sacrifices when, you're saying this is more of a community tool versus a project management tool. And so it really comes down to, what are you trying to do with the tool? I think that I personally don't love SharePoint. I have not met a person who likes SharePoint. I've developed in SharePoint. I've stood up multiple SharePoint instances. Maybe it's come a long way, but I think having two different pieces of software that are meant to talk to each other is clunky. Whereas if you have like a Basecamp or a Notion where it's all encompassed in one thing, that's really helpful. I mean, my brain is kind of spinning in multiple different ways, trying to think of like everything I know about project management tools. So you need to rein me back in, John.
Yeah, well, they're all over the place. And I think we've at least given people a rough idea of some places where they can start, depending on what they want to do. But it is a good transition is right into software development lifecycle, which we've come at it from the tactic. And what we really wanted to talk about, what was on the topic list, is this idea that so many marketing people now are facing their managers or their boards or whatever, who are saying to them, you need to be doing more AI, let's have an AI initiative. And it's just all about the tools. And one of the things that we've seen over and over again, and you've championed, is this idea that you need to apply the software development lifecycle, because these are just like any other software tools. All this AI stuff is used to do other things in the business. And the key is not to just start cherry picking tools and messing around. The idea is find a business problem, do a 5P analysis, which we talk about at Trust Insights all the time, and using the software development lifecycle too, to get in there and figure out how this thing gets implemented, set up. What are the dependencies for it? How does it get tested? How does it get bug fixed? All these things are just normal software development process. So I guess, backing up, we should probably jump into software development lifecycle a little bit more, though, to talk about that. So when you're saying that people should be using more SDLC principles for AI, where do they start? What's the first thing that they should be doing?
Requirements gathering. That is the lead off of any SDLC. So the SDLC, software development lifecycle, the standard like basic phases of an SDLC are requirements gathering, design, development, testing, and then, iteration, refinement, and then you sort of start all over again. How quickly you move through those phases really depends on the kinds of processes that you have built into your organization as a whole. And so, I've mentioned waterfall and I've mentioned agile, very high level. I'm not trying to, come after people who subscribe to the agile manifesto. It has its place in time, but at a high level, waterfall is, if you think about like a set of stairs, everything is dependent. You can't move down to the next step until you've completed phase one. So you have to finish your requirements before you can move on to design. You have to finish design before you can move on to development. Whereas with agile, you do a lot of these things concurrently. You take the plan as a whole, you break it down into smaller pieces, and then you do define, design, development, testing, iteration, and then you sort of start all over again while doing the next milestone in parallel. And so it's meant to move quicker. And what I was actually saying to Chris this morning, because Chris was asking, he's like, with AI, does it sort of negate the need for agile because you're moving so much faster? And I said, no, absolutely not, because it's a process. It's the coding itself is going faster. The process itself is not, if you can't get the right requirements. And so to answer your question, that's a very long way to answer your question, John, where you start with the SDLC is requirements gathering. And too often, AI or not, people are jumping right into coding and developing and just sort of like, let's see what happens.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Actually, I haven't done seen any research on this, but with so much stuff being web-based now, it seems like continuous development is the majority of stuff that's happening out there. I can't think of many software products that are doing big bang stuff. I guess for phone infrastructure, big giant OSs or versions of Windows and things like that. But everything else, yeah, it just, and there's a whole rat hole to go down with agile development. We had done a bunch of research on this years ago, but it's basically this idea that by testing and implementing features and functions on a weekly or faster basis, when you look at your calendar, the problem with waterfall is if you're doing quarterly releases or greater, you can have entire quarters that get lost and wasted, because if something gets broken or some feature doesn't take off the way it's supposed to, you just have these tremendous losses that you can rack up. And this idea of constantly refining and deploying, it gives you an advantage where at the end of the year, you're never going to have a bad quarter. Like, you may have a couple bad weeks, but it just makes a lot more sense. And yeah, for folks who haven't dug into it, there's a completely religious level of fanaticism over agile and what it is, and the manifesto versus what actually happens in the real world and things like that. And we don't want to get too torn up in all that, but yeah, we'll kind of leave it at that. So one thing I wanted to throw out too is talking about these situations where people are told that they need to do more AI. Like, how do you deal with that? One method for that, and we've used this, Chris has made it the core of training, is that there are 7 general use cases for AI. You've got extraction, classification, summarization, rewriting, synthesis, question answering, and generation. And so that's an easy go-to. If somebody's like, hey, you need to do more AI, well, you can say, okay, well, which of these 7 things do you want us to start chasing? And that at least, gets you out of the like, oh, let's just spend 2 weeks figuring out what's out there in the world. You can at least pick something and then try and solve that problem. And that will, now allow you to do some requirements gathering and allow you to apply the 5 Ps and get, to where you need to go. Any other, comments or ideas, feedback on that, on how people should do this and, get faster to that point where they're doing requirements gathering?
Um, well, I want to acknowledge we have a comment from our friend Brian Piper who says vibe coding is throwing a wrench into the SDLC. And Brian, I don't disagree with you. So we recorded a live stream and probably a podcast too over at Trust Insights about vibe coding. And I personally, again, N of one, but I have a lot of experience with the SDLC. I think that there's a lot of danger. It's a very harsh word, but there's a lot of things to be careful of when you're vibe coding, because vibe coding makes it sound like anybody can code, which is true. However, if you don't know what you're doing in terms of software development, then it can go wrong really quickly. So, for example, if you don't know that you have to put in, privacy protocols, or your software should not be hackable, for example, or if you're collecting information, how do you keep that information secure? So, if you're like, I want to build an app, let me just vibe code it and see, what happens. The machine's going to do it for me. If you don't know the foundational pieces of the software development lifecycle, or even just software development in general, best practices, it could go really wrong. And so I agree, Brian, that vibe coding is sort of wrench in the SDLC because it skips that foundational piece of let's write down some requirements. Now, you can use generative AI to write requirements. You can say, hey, generative AI, large language model, I want to do a thing, but first I want to make sure I have requirements so that it doesn't go off the rails. Can you help me do that? Absolutely, you can do that. So I think, John, to answer your question, the way that you're getting faster is you're using these tools as almost like the note taker. You still have to have the idea, but it's going to also sort of like, hey, did you think about this? Hey, what about privacy? Hey, what about governance? Hey, what about security? It can ask you those questions if you say, I want to do this as safely, as securely, best practices, protect my customers. It's going to go, oh, those are words that I know. So let me make sure I'm asking those questions, provided you know what you're doing, even at a base level. Like, so you can say, hey, generative AI, what did I miss? That's a great place to start.
Yeah, right. Doing checkup. And there is, from touching on what Brian said, there's two levels. There is totally the running with scissors problem, right? People building stuff that they've never built before and don't understand. And like you said, yeah, privacy and security. But then there is also, for experienced developers, I have seen all these cases of developers, becoming 5-6 times more productive because they're just able to grind out code. And that's a whole different thing. I don't pretend to be any kind of expert on what, how that works or where that goes, because that's a whole other thing.
But you just said something really important. You said experienced developers
who
are becoming
totally
5, 6, 10x.
There's crew.
So like they know what they're doing. So it totally makes sense that generative AI would make them more productive because they know what they're doing. And that to me is the key. And so vibe coding, yes, is throwing a wrench in the SDLC, but not for people who understand and practice the SDLC.
All right, that makes sense. Yeah, and keeping on the MOC timeline, we got to roll ahead a little bit here. I did have one thing that I wanted to throw out that I saw. There's an article about talking about geo. People are talking about SEO, search engine optimization. Well, generative engine optimization is geo. Or GEO. My first thought was just like, no, I don't want that. Like, bring me something else. All right, so we seem to be on the same page. I do have a link on that. There were some stats about amount of traffic that's going to chat instead of organic search results, and they're saying that it's only 3 or 4% of the total volume of search. It's growing, but it's not. It's been kind of overblown as what people should be afraid of. I also wanted to throw out Auracast. I had a test deployment successful. I have finally gotten that to work after playing around with that. I've talked about it on previous shows, but just a quick take on that is this idea that you basically would go onto your phone and look at the audio playing around you, and you can just push and you can listen to what's there. And it's multi-point Bluetooth is really what this is. So, Bluetooth is hamstrung where just you can listen to the music you're playing. And a lot of phones now will do a second person. Somebody else can share that thing. But this is where you set up a box that's streaming. I mean, I have a tiny box smaller than a pack of Tic Tacs that you could plug into an iPod or into your computer and play audio, and groups of people could, hear that or listen to that. And the use case that I've been crazy about is at airports, at your gate could have its own Auracast. And so you could be anywhere in the airport, but you're going to hear, hey, they're boarding, your plane now. And there's obviously a ton of use cases for museums and movie theaters and places where, lots of people, now you just see some of these places where they have these crazy devices and it's Wi-Fi enabled, or there's just all this stuff, and just make that all go away. It's if you have Auracast headphones and you have a phone, boom, that's it. You can access this. So that does work and run. Also, random follow-up. I was talking about car audio. I destroyed the car battery on our car, which I am not dead or didn't lose any limbs or anything. So I'm marking that a complete success. But basically, as I was reattaching the car battery, the wrench flipped off and it closed the circuit between the two terminals, and instantly heated up to 5,000 degrees and just about melted the wrench and killed me. So I wanted to do a PSA for folks to, make sure you've got your battery terminals covered when you got the wrenches flying around. And then media stuff. We had Wednesday is out on Netflix. Wednesday Addams, of course, if you're not familiar with it, they did season 1, season 2 is back. You guys said you watched it. What was your take on that?
Yeah, we watched the first episode last night, and we both, within the first few minutes, had the same reaction of, they definitely went more dark this season. Like, I feel like the first season was a good introduction. Like, it was like a little bit more lighthearted. I know that the actress Jenna Ortega was not a huge fan of focusing on like Wednesday's love life. And I know that in season 2, that's not really part of the storyline at all. And she is thrilled about it. She's like, that's not what this character is about. It's much darker. It's focused more on, the things that Wednesday is interested in, so if you haven't seen it, I don't want to give away too much, but yeah, it's interesting. And of course it's Tim Burton. And so if you know any of his stuff, like, you're like, wow, this is so Tim Burton. And I think he's done a fantastic job with it so far.
Yeah, no, they came charging out of the gate in the first episodes. If you haven't seen it, it's not like anything else out there. We have so many sequels and, stuff getting retreaded, and this is just completely original, which makes it fantastic. So you want to check out that. And then on Nerd Watch, I had the 4K Dolby restoration of Tron. For old school tech movies, they've completely kind of freshly brushed that up and made it look cool again. So that's a big deal. And then I'm actually going to Fan Expo in Boston, which is basically the Comic-Con. It's not the official brand Comic-Con, but yeah, my son wants to go hit that this weekend, so we're going to be down there, and yeah, that should be interesting. I'll have plenty to report back on that. But yeah,
I did that quite a few years back. We went to the Boston version of the Comic-Con, and it was interesting because we were on the T, the MBTA, we call it the T in Boston. And it was the same day there was a Red Sox game. There was a Bruins like preseason or something going on, and then there was Comic-Con. And so you had all those different cultures sort of like colliding on one train car, which was really fascinating. But we went there and were able to get the autograph of the guy who created Mad Magazine, which was pretty cool.
Oh, that's very cool. Jaffe, yeah, God, that's Saul Colt has worked with a bunch of those guys from there. But yeah, that's a good grab, because that's Mad Magazine has its own cult following. And yeah, I grew up with that. That was comedy like you couldn't get. There's no Simpsons without Mad Magazine. That's for sure. And
I always looked forward to the trifold in the back.
right. The hidden thing. Yeah. Oh God, we're dating ourselves with old print stuff that nobody cares about anymore. All right. I want to give a plug. Of course, the Marketing Over Coffee text line is at 617-812-5494. And again, analytics for marketers for Trust Insights. And yeah, that wraps up the MOC stuff. I don't know. Is there any stuff you want to do for So What? Things you want to cover? Bonus content for people that stay on the live stream here.
Bonus content. So if we're switching gears and we go back to the Trust Insights background, we just thought it'd be really interesting this week to do a live recording of one of our podcasts. And so Marketing Over Coffee being John and Chris's podcast, I occasionally crash it when Chris is out of town. But, you know, I know that, there's a lot of, videos of people recording their podcasts and, lots of live streams, but marketing over coffee in particular, like John, you don't use the video that you record with. So I thought it would be fun for people who are longtime fans to be able to actually see, like, here's what we're doing. Like, it doesn't look different from the live stream or anything, but it's different content. So I just thought it would be interesting. Do you think that you would ever I know I ask you this all the time, but would you ever put up a YouTube channel and start putting up the videos from?
Oh yeah, there's a YouTube channel. It doesn't get a ton of play. I'll throw certain episodes up there once in a while, and then we do have the transcripts get basically auto transcribed, and then the audio goes up on there. So, but yeah, it's the thing for us. It's always been, we've had so many listeners that have talked about, hey, we want the audio podcast show. This is when we're at the gym or when we're driving. We don't have time to sit down and watch it. But the thing that's changed is, like, you have to be doing video on YouTube. Like we always have to add more stuff, more content. And it's, I was even listening to there was another marketing podcast that was talking about this today, and that's the whole challenge of, like, you want to do these clips, but people are using these automated tools, and the clips are terrible, and they miss good clips. So it's like, how do you manage all this? And yeah, it's just, as part of the workload, video is always falling to the bottom of the pile for me. But yeah, there is value to it. And then if you can cross over to get that point where you get thousands of people watching a stream and you're constantly getting feedback and stuff. But yeah, we talk to busy people, and it's the same thing with Trust Insights fans. Like, they have work to do. They want the deep dive of the stuff, and they appreciate the video when they can do it. But it's got to be on demand, because appointment meeting is just a challenge on the B2B side.
Well, and I had to laugh because, we're very transparent. We use a lot of AI tools. And I know that, so Chris, who does the post-production for our podcast, he has, his scripts and his processes, and every single week, without fail, it cuts me off mid-sentence in the promo video. And I'm like, dude, just, like, let it do the whole sentence. But that would require actually manually doing it, not using the AI. And I've talked to a lot of people who have had the same complaint. Like, they want to make the process faster. They don't have time to edit out all the clips. But what happens when you let AI do it is that it will cut off mid-sentence, or it will take things so wildly out of context that, like, if you had just, like, a few seconds more of preamble, then the sentence that was being chosen would make sense. So I'm sure there's people who specialize in that particular thing. I would love to hear from them and, like, what it is that we're doing wrong that we should be fixing. If you want to head over to our free Slack group, trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, tell us how to better use AI-powered video editing software so that our promo clips don't look just all hacked together. I would love that, because we record the newsletter. I would love to do promo clips for that, but ain't nobody got time. I would love to use more promo clips from the podcast, not just the one that we post once a week, and all of the other videos we create. We do the live stream, like, we're doing this for Marketing Over Coffee. Like, I would love to use all of that footage, but we're a small team and we don't have time to do all of that editing in a way that feels like it was done thoughtfully.
Yeah, well, that's the dirty little secret of these tools that nobody talks about. It's like, yeah, I can do it, but you pretty much need somebody to watch it and confirm that it got the right thing and it's the best one. And so now you've got a human in the whole mix anyways. So do you want them to pick the clips too? Yeah, that's interesting. I know there's some other tools out there, and Adobe has some stuff. Like, I think a great way to do it is if there was a way where, as we're doing this, we had a marker to tap. We could say that, oh, hey, that was a great point, and then grab 30 seconds before that. That's something that could work. I'll have to dig around and see if there's anything that can do that as part of the recording process, because that would make something more interesting. Because yeah, it's this idea of, like, running it and getting 4 things out of the grab bag and having to watch them and see which ones are any good. Like, that's you're just starting to chew up a bunch of time. It's not really saving you the hours that that we would all like to see with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that that's an interesting idea. Anything else for the Marketing Over Coffee episode for today that we didn't get to cover because of so for those who don't know, as we recorded the live version of Marketing Over Coffee, unlike the live stream, which can go on for like 45 minutes to 60 minutes, Marketing Over Coffee is a shorter form podcast. So, John, you typically run like 20 to 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, well, the goal is to shoot for like 22. I mean, back in the day when it was, well, as we're heading to now, back in the office, the idea is that you've got to commute or you've got to work out. That's, the idea was not to do one of these podcasts where you're a single marketing talking head talking for an hour 30. That's just way too much stuff. So yeah, the idea was kind of like get 3 or 4 key points out there and make it done in less than 25 minutes so people can go on to their next guest or whatever. And the other thing we talked about, like reviewing tools or giving feedback on stuff, always actionable, something that you can take away as soon as you're done with. So, but yeah, we got clipped. I was going back through the rundown to see if there was anything else that got munched. I guess the big one was K-pop Demon Slayers. I had that on the list as exciting stuff.
I have no idea what that is.
You haven't seen? Oh, well, so Korean pop, they have a whole movie about this fact that they're a Korean girl band is actually protecting the world from demons overrunning us. And so it's big with the kids. The kids love this stuff. You got to check this out.
Well, see, there's my problem. I don't have any kids in the house.
Yes, I know, kids. You need that constant influx, but it's running wild. It's been number 1 or 2 on the movie on Netflix for the past couple of weeks because it's just been on fire. The thing has been huge. I think I had that.
Over in her Slack group, our good friend Jenny Dietrich was mentioning that she's gotten really into the music from the K-pop Demon Slayers or whatever. Like, I think she said it's really catchy. So I'll have to check it out just to like even see what the heck is going on. When I hear of something, I at least try to look it up to see like what it is so that I can have somewhat of an intelligent conversation about it. But this time I'm lost.
Well, you should definitely dig in then. Yeah. And it's on fire on Spotify too. There's a couple playlists from the movie. And yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's perfectly engineered pop, I mean, is just as shiny and perfect as it can be, but it is amazing to see. There's a lot of stuff you'll hear. You'll be like, oh my God, that is Queen, or that is, Huey Lewis, or that is REM. Like, you can see the influences. As somebody who's a huge fan of music, you will completely love, playing the guess it game as you listen to these songs and try and figure out where it comes from. Because there's so many themes that they pick up to just make this bulletproof pop candy that it's worth checking out. I'll dig one up and throw it in the MOC show notes so people can dig in and click around and listen. But yeah, if you're listening for ear candy, just fun that's not gonna it's not gonna bring you down, that you can't miss with K-pop.
Did you ever see? Now we're into sort of like the devolved version that John and I do at the end of every show. Did you ever see? There's a clip of Ed Sheeran. And I think he's on some talk show. I'd have to look it up and I'll find you the YouTube clip, John, where basically he's saying that every song can be reduced down to the same 3 or 4 chords. And so he's sitting there with his guitar and he's a really talented musician. He's like, give me a song. And he's like playing these like 3 or 4 chords. And like, it doesn't matter what song the host gave him. He was able to play it within those constraints. And the host was like, that is crazy.
Yeah, no, that's it. Like Pachelbel's Canon is one. There's a bunch of stuff you can YouTube. You can basically take Pachelbel's Canon. There's tons of songs that have been taken on that. And yeah, there's a riff on Taylor Swift. She has a chord progression she always uses. And then if for old school music folks, Billy Joel has a thing on HBO that has just come out, a huge tale of his whole life. And he talks about stealing from classical music all the time. I mean, he's like Uptown Girl is basically Mozart that he just kind of sped up and got moving. So yeah, the idea of people just using these tropes over and over again is, there's certain music that we love, and I don't know, you can get really deep into it as far as like that's what connects us. These drums and having a pulse in the music, and that's all part of the human experience that we can't quantify, and it brings more to our lives.
One of my favorite interviews is Dave Grohl sitting down with Pharrell, and Pharrell's like, you're this amazing drummer. And Dave Grohl's like, stop calling me an amazing drummer. And he's like, and Pharrell's like, what are you talking about? You were in Nirvana, you did this. And he's like, yeah, if you listen to Smells Like Teen Spirit, I basically pulled everything from disco. And so Pharrell's like sitting there, he's like, oh my God. And so Dave Grohl's like, showing how he did it. It's all the upbeats from disco. And you're like, oh my God. Smells Like Teen Spirit is just disco.
No, he's totally stole the Gap Band for
that's what it was, the Gap Band.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And I feel so Roll had like talked to the guy from the Gap and he's like, hey, I stole all your stuff. And the guy's like, yeah, I know. You owe me some
I mean,
money.
it's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
And this type of conversation is something that John and I, when it gets to be like the holidays, we'll record episodes of Marketing Over Coffee that talk like strictly about music. Like we've tried to do just music shows. So if you're interested in John and I doing that, maybe with some live audience participation, hit us up at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, or leave a comment on Marketing Over Coffee, or just find us and let us know, because that's the kind of thing that we could totally talk about all day long. We tried to do 5 for Friday, and that was, gosh, 6-7 years ago we tried to do that, and quite honestly, we just ran out of time. Like, we wanted to do it. It's a passion project. We just couldn't get it.
Tom Webster ran with that for a little while, and he is just a music genius. But this is something we could do when we're at Profs B2B in Boston in the fall, and Tom's down there too. We could do an Auracast of, do a silent disco. People could pop on their headphones and listen to some tunes. So yeah, if you're on the B2B list for marketing profs, give us a yell on that, because we should definitely put something together on that front.
Yeah, we should start doing the spinning up the Friday DJ as well. You were doing that for a while.
It's the same thing. Well, even TT Live Turntable, I think that is like the coolest music thing going, but it's just, there's only so many hours in the day, and I don't have the time to be Deadmau5 or DJ Khaled or whatever you want to say. But yeah, I could just be spinning obscure tunes all the time. But everybody likes to be their own DJ. I think that's really the punchline on that one.
Yeah. All right. Well, so for those watching, this was a live recording of Marketing Over Coffee. If you want to subscribe to Marketing Over Coffee, go over to marketingovercoffee.com. If you want to sponsor Marketing Over Coffee, you can go ahead and go to marketingovercoffee.com, or you can find us at trustinsights.ai/contact, and you can still find John there. And if you just want to tell us the kind of stuff that you want to hear about on future live streams or future episodes of the podcast, go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers to join our free Slack community with over 4,000 friends and marketers and people asking and answering questions. It's a good time. And tomorrow's Friday. And so Fridays are unhinged, and we ask non-work questions, and sometimes they go off the rails. And sometimes I just let that happen.
Yeah, no, that's always fun on Fridays. Everybody, it's just like the board lights up when you throw those questions out. So yeah, definitely jump in on that if you're looking for something to, both write it off as work and have some fun.
That's right. All right, John, I think that's it for this week.
That sounds good. It was a great time. And yeah, we will see you around. We'll be back again next week.
Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.